Stop being nice, not because kindness is wrong, but because fake niceness is a quiet betrayal of who you really are, a habit learned early when approval felt safer than honesty and silence felt easier than conflict. And over time this habit turns into a mask you forget you are wearing, smiling when you want to speak, agreeing when every part of you wants to say no, lowering your voice when your truth wants to be loud. Because being nice trains you to prioritize comfort over clarity, acceptance over authenticity, and peace over progress, and slowly you begin to measure your worth by how little trouble you cause instead of how much truth you carry. You start editing yourself in rooms where you should be expanding, shrinking your needs so others can feel bigger, laughing at jokes that cut you, tolerating behavior you would never allow if you respected yourself fully, and the cost of this niceness is always paid by you, paid in resentment, in exhaustion, in the quiet anger that builds when your inner voice is constantly ignored, because being nice often means being dishonest in small ways every single day, saying it's fine when it's not, saying whatever you want when you know exactly what you want, saying yes with your mouth while your body says no. And this constant self-betrayal doesn't make you a good person, it makes you invisible to yourself, because realness is not cruelty and honesty is not aggression. Realness is alignment. It is when your words match your thoughts and your actions match your values. And people fear losing love if they stop being nice, but what they're really losing is self-respect, because the world doesn't reward niceness the way it pretends to. It exploits it, it leans on it, it takes advantage of it, and then it forgets it, while respecting those who are clear, grounded, and honest, those who set boundaries without apology, who say no without long explanations, who don't perform goodness but live with integrity. And being real means accepting that not everyone will like you, not everyone will understand you, and not everyone will stay, but the ones who do will know you, not the edited version, not the agreeable shadow, but the actual human with opinions, limits, standards, and a spine. And this shift from nice to real is uncomfortable at first because it feels like danger to a nervous system trained to survive through people-pleasing, trained to read rooms, manage moods, and smooth tension before it explodes. But realness asks you to tolerate discomfort, to sit with the awkward pause after you say what you mean, to allow others to feel disappointed, confused, or even upset without rushing to fix it. Because their emotions are not emergencies you have to solve, and every time you choose realness over niceness, you reclaim a piece of yourself, a piece that was buried under politeness and fear. You start trusting your instincts again. You start hearing your own voice clearly, and you realize how much energy you were wasting trying to be liked instead of trying to be true. Because niceness often comes with hidden contracts. I'll be good if you approve of me, I'll stay quiet if you don't reject me, I'll overgive if you don't leave. And realness tears up those contracts and replaces them with boundaries, with self-trust, with the understanding that your value is not negotiated through compliance. And when you start being real, conversations change, relationships change, your presence changes. You stop attracting people who feed on your silence and start attracting people who respect your clarity. Because clarity is magnetic, it signals strength without shouting, confidence without arrogance, and honesty without cruelty. And this doesn't mean becoming harsh or insensitive, it means being direct and kind at the same time, firm and fair, compassionate without self-erasure. And the irony is that true kindness can only exist when you are real, because kindness without honesty is manipulation. It is smiling while resenting, helping while keeping score, giving while hoping for validation. And realness cleans this up. It simplifies life, because you no longer have to remember who you pretended to be. You no longer have to replay conversations wondering why you didn't say what you felt. You no longer wake up with that tight feeling in your chest from unspoken truths piling up. And as you practice being real, your nervous system learns that honesty does not equal abandonment, that disagreement does not equal danger, that setting a boundary does not make you bad. And you begin to feel grounded in your own skin, solid in your choices, less reactive, less needy, less desperate for external approval. Because approval loses its power when you approve of yourself. And being real also means taking responsibility, owning your mistakes without excuses, apologizing without performing, standing by your values even when it costs you convenience. Because realness is not about saying whatever you want, it's about saying what matters. It's about choosing truth over performance, substance over image, depth over surface. And when you stop being nice, you stop living. On autopilot, you stop letting fear dictate your personality, you stop confusing politeness with morality, and you start asking better questions like, what do I actually want? What do I actually believe? What am I tolerating that is slowly draining me? And the answers may disrupt your current life, they may challenge relationships, routines, and identities you've outgrown, but they also open space for growth, for alignment, for a life that feels honest instead of managed, because the goal was power lives, not in domination, not in aggression, but in self-alignment, in the quiet confidence of someone who knows who they are and is no longer willing to disappear for the comfort of others. Someone who understands that being real is not a phase or a tactic but a daily practice of choosing truth over fear, presence over performance, and self-respect over approval while continuing to navigate a world that often rewards masks but ultimately bends to those who stand firmly in who they are and refuse to dilute themselves even when it would be easier to smile and stay silent and let things pass instead of speaking from that grounded place where honesty becomes a way of life rather than a momentary act of courage. Being real also forces you to confront the parts of yourself that niceness was hiding, the anger you swallowed, the disappointment you minimized, the desires you labeled as too much, because niceness is often a coping strategy, a survival skill learned when being authentic felt unsafe, when speaking up led to punishment, rejection, or withdrawal of love, so you adapted, you became agreeable, flexible, easy to deal with, and while that adaptation once protected you, it no longer serves the version of you trying to grow, because what protected you then can imprison you now, and realness requires unlearning. It requires noticing the impulse to smooth things over and choosing instead to stay present, to breathe through the discomfort, to let your truth exist without rushing to decorate it with politeness, and this is where many people quit, because the moment you stop being nice, the world reacts, people question you, test you, accuse you of changing, of becoming selfish, rude, cold, or difficult, not because you are wrong, but because your new boundaries disrupt their access to you, and this feedback can be confusing if you're still measuring yourself through other people's comfort. But realness asks you to tolerate being misunderstood, to accept that clarity will be labeled as aggression by those who benefited from your silence, and this is a critical moment, because if you retreat back into niceness here, you reinforce the belief that your truth is dangerous, but if you hold steady, something shifts, your nervous system learns that you can survive disapproval, that the world doesn't end when you say what you mean, that you don't collapse when someone is unhappy with you, and slowly, your body begins to relax into honesty. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, your mind quiets, because you're no longer constantly scanning for approval or threat, and being real starts to feel less like rebellion and more like home, and as this becomes your default, you begin to notice how much noise niceness created, how many unnecessary obligations filled your time, how many conversations you endured out of politeness rather than desire, how many relationships survived only because you kept shrinking. And realness brings discernment. It teaches you to choose deliberately, to invest where there is mutual respect, to disengage without drama, to walk away without explaining yourself into exhaustion, and this discernment is often mistaken for coldness, but it is actually clarity paired with self-respect, and with clarity comes responsibility, because when you stop hiding behind niceness, you can no longer blame others for crossing boundaries you never stated. You can no longer resent people for taking what you freely gave. You are forced to own your choices, your yes, your no's, your silence, your participation, and this accountability is uncomfortable but liberating, because it returns your power to you. It reminds you that you are not a victim of your personality, you are an active participant in your life, shaping it with every decision to speak or stay quiet, to engage or withdraw, and being real also changes the way you experience conflict, because instead of avoiding it at all costs, you learn to navigate it cleanly, directly, without character attacks or emotional manipulation. You learn to express impact without exaggeration, to listen without collapsing, to disagree without self-abandonment, and this skill alone transforms relationships, because conflict handled honestly builds trust, while conflict avoided through niceness builds distance, and distance eventually turns into resentment, and resentment poisons even the most polite connection, and as you become more real, you may grieve the time you lost, the energy you overgave, the versions of yourself that never got to speak, and this grief is part of the process, because awareness always brings mourning, but it also brings choice, and choice brings freedom, and freedom feels unfamiliar at first, even scary, because without the script of niceness, you have to decide who you are moment by moment, what you stand for, what you tolerate, what you refuse, and this requires presence, not autopilot. And presence is demanding, but it is also deeply grounding, because when you are present, you are less reactive, less defensive, less eager to please, and more anchored in your internal compass, and this internal compass becomes your guide, replacing external validation, guiding your decisions in work, in love, in friendships, in family dynamics, in how you speak to yourself, because being real is not just about how you interact with others, it is about the relationship you have with yourself, the promises you keep, the standards you uphold when no one is watching, the honesty you practice in your own mind, and when that relationship strengthens, external chaos loses its grip, because you are no longer negotiating your worth in every interaction, and you start to see how much of your exhaustion was not from doing too much, but from pretending too much, from holding back truth, from managing perceptions, from carrying emotional labor that was never yours to begin with. And as this weight lifts, your energy returns, not as hype or aggression, but as steadiness, as quiet confidence, as the ability to move through situations without losing yourself. And this steadiness is often misinterpreted as indifference, but it is actually self-trust in motion, and self-trust allows you to be flexible without being fragile, open without being porous, kind without being self-sacrificing, and the more you practice this, the more you realize that being real does not push the right people away. It filters, it clarifies, it reveals who can meet you where you are and who only knew how to take advantage of who you were. And this revelation can feel lonely at first because the crowd gets smaller, but the connections get deeper, cleaner, more reciprocal, and in this smaller, truer space, you begin to expand, creatively, emotionally, mentally, because your energy is no longer leaking into performance, and with this expansion comes a new kind of courage, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet courage of consistency, the courage to show up as yourself even when it's inconvenient, even when it's misunderstood, even when it doesn't immediately pay off, and this is where real transformation happens, not in viral moments of boldness, but in daily choices to tell the truth gently but firmly, to correct misunderstandings instead of letting them slide, to express needs without apology, to walk away from dynamics that require you to betray yourself, and as these choices accumulate, they reshape your identity. You stop seeing yourself as nice and start seeing yourself as honest, reliable, grounded, someone whose yes means yes and whose no means no, someone who does not confuse harmony with silence or love with compliance, and this identity shift influences how others treat you, because people respond to clarity, they adjust to boundaries that are consistently enforced, they learn what to expect from you, and even those who resist at first often adapt, because consistency commands respect in a way niceness never could, and in moments where they don't adapt, where they push harder, guilt trip, or withdraw, you are faced with another choice, to return to old patterns or to remain rooted in your truth, and each time you choose the latter, you reinforce a new internal reality, one where your needs are not negotiable extras but essential data, one where your voice is not a disruption but a contribution, one where your presence does not depend on performance, and this internal shift slowly begins to influence your outer world, the opportunities you accept, the standards you set, the way you occupy space, the way you speak in rooms that once intimidated you, because you are no longer asking for permission to exist as you are. You are simply showing up, grounded, aware, aligned, carrying yourself with the quiet authority of someone who knows that being real is not about winning arguments or asserting dominance, but about living without internal contradiction, about closing the gap between who you are and how you show up, and this gap, once closed, changes everything, the way time feels, the way decisions land, the way peace settles into your body, not as comfort, but as coherence, and coherence becomes the foundation from which you move forward, navigating complexity without losing yourself, choosing honesty even when your voice shakes, choosing clarity even when it costs you ease, choosing self-respect even when the old habit of niceness whispers that it would be simpler to smile, agree, and move on instead of standing firmly in that growing, grounded place where your truth continues to expand, reshape, and redefine the way you exist in a world that is slowly responding to the version of you that no longer disappears to keep things smooth at some point, being real stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are, not a strategy, not a phase, not a personality shift you turn on and off depending on the room, but a settled way of moving through life. And this is where the deepest change reveals itself, because the question is no longer should I speak up, or will they like me, but is this aligned with who I am, and that single question simplifies everything. Because alignment cuts through confusion, it removes the mental negotiations, the emotional bargaining, the internal debates that once drained your energy, and you begin to trust yourself in a way that feels quiet but unshakable. A trust built not on perfection but on consistency, on the repeated experience of choosing honesty even when it costs you comfort. And with this trust comes peace, not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the grounded peace of knowing that even if things get uncomfortable, you will not abandon yourself to escape it, and this peace changes how you respond to life, because you are no longer reacting from fear or people-pleasing, you are responding from clarity, and clarity brings patience. It allows you to pause instead of rush, to listen without collapsing, to speak without exploding, and this balanced presence becomes one of your greatest strengths, because it signals safety to those who are secure and firmness to those who are not, and over time, you notice that life starts meeting you differently, not because the world has changed, but because you have. Your standards are clearer, your boundaries are cleaner, your energy is more contained, and people feel that. They sense when someone is no longer available for manipulation, guilt, or emotional games, and they either rise to meet that level or quietly fall away. And while the falling away can still sting, it no longer destabilizes you, because your sense of self is no longer built on external attachment but on internal coherence, and this coherence influences the choices you make in subtle but powerful ways. You stop chasing opportunities that look good but feel wrong, you stop forcing connections that require you to perform. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, and instead, you invest your time, attention, and effort where there is mutual respect, where honesty is welcomed, where growth is shared rather than demanded, and this selectivity is not arrogance, it is discernment refined through experience, and with discernment comes freedom, the freedom to say no without guilt, yes without resentment, and maybe most importantly, the freedom to change your mind when new information appears. Because being real is not about rigidity, it is about responsiveness, about being rooted in your values while remaining open to learning. And this openness allows you to integrate your past rather than reject it, to look at the years you spent being nice not with shame but with understanding, recognizing that you did the best you could with the tools you had at the time, and that compassion for your former self becomes the bridge to compassion for others. Because you can now see when people are acting from fear rather than malice, from conditioning rather than character, and this awareness softens you without weakening you. It allows you to hold firm boundaries with a calm heart, to disengage without contempt, to speak truth without needing to dominate, and this balance is rare, and it becomes your signature, the way you show up consistently, grounded, clear, and present, and as this becomes your baseline, you begin to experience a deeper sense of fulfillment, not the high of approval or praise, but the steady satisfaction of living in integrity, of knowing that your words, actions, and values are aligned, and this integrity becomes your anchor in moments of uncertainty. Because life does not suddenly become easy when you start being real. Challenges still come, losses still happen, conflict still arises, but you meet these experiences differently, without the added burden of self-betrayal, without the exhausting effort of managing perceptions, and this difference is everything. Because pain without self-abandonment is manageable, but pain layered with dishonesty is overwhelming. And as you move through life with this new orientation, you may notice that your sense of purpose sharpens, not as a grand mission but as a quiet knowing of what matters to you, what you are willing to stand for, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate, and this clarity informs your work, pushing you toward contributions that feel meaningful rather than merely impressive. It informs your relationships, drawing you toward depth rather than drama. It informs your self-talk, replacing harsh criticism with honest evaluation, and this internal dialogue becomes one of your most powerful allies, because when you speak to yourself with truth and respect, you become less dependent on external reassurance, more resilient in the face of doubt, and more willing to take risks aligned with your values, and this willingness opens doors that niceness never could. Not because you are more aggressive, but because you are more visible, more present, more willing to occupy space without apology, And occupying space is not about being loud, it is about being grounded, about letting your presence be felt through consistency and integrity rather than performance, and people respond to this presence, they trust it, they rely on it, they feel steadied by it, and this trust, earned over time, becomes one of the most valuable currencies you carry, because it is rooted in who you are rather than how well you perform, and as years pass, this way of being compounds, the small daily choices to be real add up to a life that feels solid, coherent, and deeply yours, a life where you recognize yourself in your decisions, your relationships, your reflections, and this recognition is profoundly stabilizing, because it means you are no longer living as a fragmented version of yourself, divided between who you are and who you present. And in this integration, something remarkable happens, your nervous system settles, your creativity flows more freely, your relationships deepen, and your sense of meaning strengthens, not because you are constantly doing more, but because you are no longer wasting energy hiding, and this conservation of energy allows you to direct it toward growth, contribution, and presence, toward building rather than managing, toward expressing rather than suppressing. And this is where the journey from niceness to realness finds its completion, not in a dramatic declaration, but in a lived reality, where honesty becomes effortless, boundaries become natural, and self-respect becomes non-negotiable. And in this reality, you understand that being real was never about rejecting kindness, but about purifying it, stripping it of fear and performance until what remains is genuine care, offered freely rather than strategically, and this genuine care, grounded in truth, becomes a force for connection rather than depletion, and as you stand in this place, you can look back and see how far you've come, how the need to be liked once shaped your every move, and how now, your sense of worth comes from within, steady and self-sustaining, and you realize that the most powerful thing you ever did was not to become harder, louder, or colder, but to become honest, honest with yourself, honest with others, honest about what you need, what you value, and what you will no longer sacrifice, and in that honesty, you didn't lose love, you refined it, you didn't lose connection, you deepened it, you didn't lose yourself, you finally came home to who you were always meant to be, someone who understands that being real is not a rejection of the world, but an invitation to meet you as you truly are, and from that place, every step forward carries a different weight, a grounded confidence, a quiet strength, and a sense of direction that no longer depends on approval, because you are no longer trying to be nice. You are committed to being true, and that commitment, honored daily, becomes the foundation of a life lived with clarity, dignity, and enduring self-respect.